So why exactly was the Corporate Transparency Act passed to begin with? And what was the history behind the law? I'm about to explain these things to you in this video. I'm Ted Sutton, and this is Direct Answers from Corporate Direct. Now before we get started, please make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you have any general questions about anything. This is especially true if you have any questions about the Corporate Transparency Act. So why exactly was the Corporate Transparency Act passed to begin with? I read through the text of the bill, and believe me, it wasn't that fun. But there's a few reasons why Congress passed this law. The first reason was to stop illegal activity. Congress cited some activities such as money laundering, terrorist financing, tax fraud, corruption, and drug sales amongst their reasons why they passed the Corporate Transparency Act. And this is because people in the US and abroad set up shell companies to launder money and commit illicit activities. Some of the examples they cited were foreign oligarchs from Russia and Iran who set up entities in the US to hide their identities. And this is because when they set it up in certain states, they don't need to report certain information to the Secretary of State. But when they do this, they're trying to evade the law. The second reason is to help law enforcement. When people use shell companies, it can be very hard for law enforcement to investigate them and to go after the bad actors who own them. And this is because some entities have very complex structures, where some entities own another entity who own even another entity, who are then owned by a person on top. So because some of these structures can be very complex, it can be hard to find who the beneficial owners are of those structures. The third reason was to protect the country's national security. This is to protect our country from any financial threats abroad. And an example of this is that there are some foreign nationals who use LLCs to buy land in the US. But when they do this, the federal government wants them to disclose information to them. And the fourth reason they passed the Corporate Transparency Act was to match other countries' compliance standards. There are 30 other countries out there who have similar laws on the books, and some of these include the United Kingdom and other countries in the European Union. But because the US doesn't have these compliance standards, people set up shell companies in the US to conduct illegal activity. I should mention that these are the reasons why the Corporate Transparency Act was passed. But speaking with my dad and other people who set up companies for people, they're not so sure how common these activities are. Over the course of my dad's 40-year career, he can only think of one time where a person set up an entity to commit these illicit activities. Since I told you the reasons why it was passed, I'm going to walk you through a brief history of the Corporate Transparency Act. Well, the Corporate Transparency Act was a part of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2021. However, the CTA was not the main focus of the bill. This bill included appropriating $740 billion to the Pentagon. It also limited the president's use of emergency declarations to divert military funds to fund things like the border wall. Another part of the bill was to advance AI research and development in the US. And another thing that was in there was to rename military bases that were named after Confederate figures. While the Corporate Transparency Act was a part of the bill, it was certainly overshadowed by other parts of it. Now let's walk through a brief legislative history of this bill. In December 8th, it was passed by the House by a vote of 335 to 78. In December 11th, it was passed by the Senate by a vote of 84 to 13. But when it got to President Trump's desk on December 23rd, he vetoed the bill. But the reasons he vetoed it were not related to the Corporate Transparency Act at all. He wanted to repeal Section 230, which shields internet companies from liability when third parties post on their site. And he also didn't want to rename military bases after Confederate figures. However, on December 28, 2020, the House overrode the veto with a more than two-thirds majority by a vote of 322 to 87. And on January 1st, 2021, the Senate voted to override the veto 81-13. And ironically, what wasn't discussed much was the Corporate Transparency Act, which was a part of this bill. This is really important because while the Corporate Transparency Act was a part of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2021, it was overshadowed by other components of the bill. And because of this, there are a lot of congressmen who didn't focus on the Corporate Transparency Act. In fact, my dad has had discussions with 2 congressmen who were there, and neither of them knew anything about the Corporate Transparency Act. And another thing I should mention is that when this bill was passed on January 1st, 2021, there were a lot of other things that were happening in this country. We were at the height of the COVID pandemic. It was right after Biden got elected president, and it was only a few days before the events of January 6th. So clearly, the nation's eyes were focusing on other events at the time that this bill was passed. But this is why it's really important that you pay attention to things that matter. So, in the next few videos, I'll talk to you about other parts of the Corporate Transparency Act, notably what information you need to report. But if you have any general questions about this new law, please leave a comment on this video and I'd be happy to get around to it. Hold on, I'm not done yet. If you're looking to start a business, click the link in the description below and schedule a free 15-minute consultation with us. Also, make sure to check out the Corporate Direct website and subscribe to our newsletter, where we'll send you a lot of good information on corporate law amongst other things. And as always, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you have any general questions about anything. I'll see you next time.